Great. Okay, so welcome back from the break. What I'd like to do very quickly is to go over the key elements of GCP, the good clinical practice. Okay, so you've got the set of slides that we sent, and so in the interest of time, I don't have to go over the history of why we have this code of practice. It's because there were many violations of human rights in terms of experimenting on human subjects. And so there are now different international codes for guaranteeing the rights of humans. And there's a Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948 after the war. And there's also International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights in 1966. And then, but the one that is used most widely for medical research is the Declaration of Helsinki, which was put together by the World Medical Association. And these are quite high level, but there are guidelines that are put out by the International Conference on Harmonization, ICH, that governs the use of human subjects in clinical trials. And so, so in terms of knowing what it needs to do, I must say that the increasingly, if you have a grant from the US NIH, you must show that you have to undergo training in GCP before you could actually receive money. Even if you got the grant, before you actually get the money, you have to go and get training and show them that you have a certificate for GCP. So it's really important for anybody undertaking medical research to be trained in GCP. There are online training courses, and also, when I was in WHO, we run training courses for GCP as well. And so that's really important. And if you really need more detailed training, also for the people in your site, especially when you do evaluations of new tests, or you do utility studies that involve human subjects, you have to be compliant. And so what are the elements that eventually became the GCP? Now, from the Nuremberg Code, we realized that there were many human subjects that had no rights to negotiate whether they take part in a trial or not. And so the idea of voluntary consent, that they must give their consent to be in a trial free of any coercion, right? So voluntary consent is very important, and they must understand the degree of risk and the benefit. And the benefit must always override or outweigh the risk. Because in anything that we do, there's always a risk. But we do it because the benefit outweighs the risk. So that's the general principle that you must adhere to. And that there's proper preparation for the trial to make sure that everybody's protected in terms of their rights. And also the experiments must be conducted using scientifically qualified personnel, so the results are valid. And the subject must be at liberty to say at any one point if they want to stop the study, they can, or stop their not stop the study, stop their own participation in the study that they can. So these are the kind of general principles that evolved out of Nuremberg, and now we will go on to, just So next slide.
So I'm just muting someone
Yeah,
for the background
okay.
noise.
Okay. So any questions so far about that? No? Okay. Now, usually what we do is, so in terms of, let me go over some of the elements. So if we say getting informed consent, usually when a study is being done in the clinic, who should get the informed consent from the patient? Is it the doctor who sees the patient? Now, there is also, in many studies, the doctor is not allowed to get informed consent from the patient because they have a lot of authority over the patient. The patient looks up to them, and if the doctor asks them to do something, they likely would say yes, whether they like to or not, right? So usually, we want somebody independent than the authority figure, right? We want a study nurse or, somebody else who would ask for the consent and not the doctor directly. Not that the doctor is a bad person or anything, but it's just that they are seen as an authority figure, and people are afraid that if they say no to their doctor, their care would be compromised, right? So this is a very important principle, and you must make sure that they understand whether they refuse or not, their care would not be affected. They have the complete freedom to say no if they don't want to take part in it. So this is the three principles of not using human for guinea pigs, which is autonomy, which is the respect for persons to make up their mind to know whether they want to participate in the study or not, and also can I use this now? Okay, great. That you could understand the principles of how to do this, right? So the Declaration of Helsinki, there are many elements to this, but in general is to guarantee that the scientific principles is sound in terms of the study and how it's designed, because bad science is bad ethics, right? It's unethical to make people go through a study when in the end the study results are not sound, because you've wasted everyone's time and perhaps the risk to in the end not have a valid result. So it must be really, really important that you make sure that the scientific principles are sound. The researcher, now in this particular case for a drug trial, they say the researcher must be medically qualified. Now that's not applied to us, but in the same line of thinking is that in a laboratory-based evaluation or a clinic-based evaluation, the principal investigator must be qualified to do this. That is, they must understand the principles of how to conduct evaluations so that they are able to do it correctly. And that the risk and the benefit must be in favor of benefit to the patient as well as benefit to the society. So sometimes you tell the patients, you can participate in this trial where we take blood from you. There's a little bit of risk that when we take the blood, there's a little bit of bruising, and there's no immediate benefit to you because we won't know the result of whether this experimental test is good or not, but it will benefit all the other patients after we get the result, and it's a test that would improve the sensitivity and specificity, and so that more people would get detected. So the benefit is usually to everyone after the trial. So they need to understand that they are doing this for the good of other patients coming as well as for society. So that's how it needs to be explained to them, the risk-benefit ratio, and that the individual well-being of the patient must, be the paramount, and the inform must be freely given. So let me tell you that some of the examples that there's not always a very, very clear cut way to explain risks and the benefits. For example, when I was head of the ethics committee at WHO, one of the most controversial studies that were sent to us for review is a study to look at malaria vaccine effectiveness. Now, we all know malaria kills a lot of children especially, and that the malaria vaccine is very important. But by having your child take part in a malaria vaccine, and then, there's in a malaria endemic area, is it a risk to the child because it may not protect, it may make it worse. There's always a scenario, we always think of vaccine as being protective, but we've known in some diseases like chlamydia or trachoma, the first trial of the trachoma vaccine, people who were vaccinated got worse disease than the people who were not. The same with the HIV drug trial, right? The big HIV vaccine trial in 35 countries. They have to stop the trial because the people vaccinated were getting more susceptibility to HIV than the control group. So it's not always anticipated that the vaccine would be beneficial, even in a small way. It may be harmful. So for parents to consider whether they would let their child be vaccinated or not is a huge consideration. And it's really, really important. And in some communities, a lot of parents refuse. And because they say, why are you experimenting on us? Take it somewhere else to experiment. But if no one agrees to do the vaccine, we will never know whether it works or not, right? So sometimes these discussions are very, very difficult, for the subjects to comprehend. Now, in our case, for in vitro diagnostics, we don't have that problem. Usually because, the risk to you is that we take an extra sample, for example, an extra vaginal swab, we use leftover urine, we use leftover blood. There's no risk to the patient immediately. So, but still, we have to adhere by these principles. The inform must be freely given. Okay? So then, the main consideration in terms of the ethics committee to get approval. I mean, we spend how long getting approval? 9 months. 9 months. And it's already accelerated because these were protocols that were based on protocols that were previously already approved by WHO. So, but in many countries, having an independent ethics committee to review is a problem because they may not have an ethics committee at the institution, especially if the clinic is not tied to a university, for example. The clinics don't have ethics committees, right? Hospitals may have ethics committees, but they, not. So how many of your institutions actually have ethics committees? Very good. So this is good news because then, it would be very easy to have that conversation with the ethics committee if there are any issues, right? And to get approval for this study. And so the other consideration is the consent of patients who are high-risk patients or, for example, children, pregnant women, people who actually have difficulty comprehending. If they have neural deficits, they have difficulty comprehending. So be very careful about legally incompetent persons and enrolling them in the study. But I think that we have that in the protocol that, they, I think our at-risk population are MSM and sex workers. Yeah, and usually they can comprehend, so it's not an issue of comprehending. And then the post-trial access by participants of, to not only medical care, but to the test that is under evaluation. So, I mean, that next step, the adoption of the tests that been evaluated in your country is another step that is on that roadmap to translating to be adopted. So we'll do that separately. So right now, we need to just understand that. And then, there's all these, so you could read these at your leisure, because these are just processes of how we came to have an international framework to govern the use of human subjects in scientific research, and that it has to be done ethically. And so I'll just go to the essential elements. So these are the essential elements of GCP, and I'm not going to go through them one by one, because we've gone through the most important principle of informed consent. Now, data integrity and data management, we're going to roll it into the GCLP discussion about data. But it shows here all the things that you must do to be compliant. So you could take your time, because you have these materials already, to go through it. And if you feel that you need more training or on-site training, let us know. So these are the essential elements that we're talking about, GCP, the content of the GCP, the informed consent. So the first thing is, as the principal investigator, you need to understand your responsibilities in conducting this evaluation. So you must be a qualified person. You must be responsible. You're the final person responsible for the medical care of the participants. And that all the communications with the ethics committee is on as part of your responsibility. And you are the one who makes sure that there's internal quality assurance, and that when the external monitors come to monitor the quality of the trial, that you are the person who will interact with the external monitor, and that you're responsible for all the handling, sign-off on everything, and then archiving of study-related information and data. So this is very important, and it's something that you need to understand. Now, I think that this is the formation of an ethics committee and the composition of the ethics committee. And since you already have ethics committees, we won't go over that. But this is something you need to read over and make sure that at least, the ethics committee that's constituted at your institution is valid. Now, this part is what's in the informed consent. So within the protocol, you already have an example of how to get informed consent. So the core protocols at the back of the protocol as an appendix is a sample informed consent form, as well as a form for the participants and the PIs to sign off. And these are the elements that are in it. And WHO Ethics Committee, since I was head of the committee, we made these templates available so that you don't have to try and redesign, an informed consent form. And so for the purpose of review, it's very important to have these standardized templates, because as a member of the review committee, anytime you want to look for information, you don't want to look through 5 pages to try and find where the information is related to each one of these items, right? So it would be really important to follow these headlines that we have in the WHO protocol, and the main thing is that the risk and the purpose of the trial is made known to them, and what is required of the participants when they participate, whether it's extra blood, whether it's consent to use their leftover samples, or whether it's additional samples that need to be taken, and that and why are you doing it, and then what the outcome of the result would of the trial would be, and the risk to them and the benefit to them or to the greater good, and then whether there are any alternatives to the treatment and compensation. So we totally would not approve using money as compensation unless it's to reimburse them for travel to the clinic or to come for any other purpose because of the trial, because it could be seen as inducement to try and bribe them to be in the protocol, to take part in the study, and they must know that they can freely say yes or no, and that they could withdraw anytime they want. Now, because this is not an extended trial where there are follow-up visits, there's only the one time that you interact with them. So this part really doesn't work very, it doesn't actually apply to us very much. But still, the principle needs to be that they could, as you explain to them about the study, and you say, oh, now I have to take more blood, they could just say no, and feel that they could say that and without affecting the care that they will get, and that everything must be confidential except to the study team, and then there must be a contact person that they could contact if they have any questions about the trial. And we also want to ensure that if you take part, if you ask the patients in the clinic to take part in a particular study, when the study results are known, that either if it's a community in a utility study, you have some kind of town hall meeting to tell people the results of the study that they participated in, or if it's in a clinic, you would have a little poster to say, now the clinic is adopting a new test because we've done, thanks to all the participants, we now found this test to be better than the old one that we used, and now, thanks to these participants, we now have a better test to them. So it's important to follow up in some way to inform the participants the results of the test. And so this is not, for drug trials, it's actually a legal requirement, but it's also very much a moral obligation, okay? So this is something, I mean, there's no way that all these evaluations can be policed by someone. So a lot of it is really dependent on the PIs to be compliant. And so the informed consent, as you can see from this figure, that that there must be no coercion, right? You must not tempt them. So there are some studies where, because of the study, they actually get tested for everything, and it's actually we have some sex workers that love to be in our study because they get their medical checkup as part of the study. And so I remember walking with Michelle Alley in Berlin in the bars, and the sex workers would come up to us and say, well, when is the next study? We want to participate, because they know that they get checked really well and they get treated very well. Yeah. And so so sometimes people actually, instead of being coerced into the study, they love to participate because you treat them well, and also they know that they're doing a greater good. So this is always the good side if you do a study well. And so in terms of the EU directive, there are now, agencies that would actually identify the procedures to be followed, consent, etc., and that the European Medicines Evaluation Agency (EMEA) actually will actually do random checks on these procedures for drug trials. But what we will hope with our study is that we send external monitors to the sites to make sure that everything is compliant. Not it's just a check. It's not really because you're doing something wrong. So, and also, it must not be seen as us policing you, but we are trying to figure out if there's anything that we could help you with to make the trial site better or to make the trial better. So that, because this is a long-term partnership between WHO and all of you in terms of a network of sites that we could trust to do evaluations quickly and well. Okay. So this is actually the essentials of GCP in terms of the informed consent part. And so the data management part of the GCP training is very similar to what we will talk about for GCLP. So I'll stop there. Any questions? No. Yeah.
Maybe add it in the microphone.
So I could just repeat Igor's question. Should we register these trials? So right now, there isn't a place to register diagnostic trials. We talked about it with the START initiative, for standards for reporting of diagnostic accuracy studies. But it's really, there are so many going on. And so we thought about it, and it's just going to be a huge task to register. So right now, but drug trials, you have to register. Otherwise, you can't even publish the studies if you don't have a registration number. So when I was in WHO as the head of the ethics committee, we started the drug trial registry, and we had to harmonize across all the trial registration databases across UK, US, Europe. But I think that for us, it may be